We are joined by a great artist, great poet, a beautiful woman, great spirit, and she goes by the name Soul D. So I'm interested in, first and foremost, learning and understanding why do you choose to define yourself with that term and that name. So can you help me out, give me a little insight into that?
Sure, and that was actually a name I tended to go by a little bit more when I was younger and first starting out, and it stood for Spirit of Unconditional Love, It's Deep. And it was pretty much just, wanting to express that acronym, but as time has gone on, I've tended to use my full name just so that I could connect it with my academic research as well, and so people could link the two. But sometimes under my writing and my poetry, when it's published, you'll see both together so people can connect the two.
All right. Now, I did a little research into your research. Not as great as I need to go and I will go. But I see you're trying to deal with the defining the identity and looking at different perspectives that may exist within the art form. Can you enlighten us a little bit as to some of the findings and maybe even the inspiration that drew you to this particular aspect, when you started to set out and discover what you wanted to study?
Well, with my original research, I was interested in a few questions. I kind of wanted to see overall what themes would emerge within the art form, but then also looking at how often the artist would make self the topic in the poems, and then what types of public selves were exhibited. So I ended up finding 5 main selves. There was the passionate self, the survivor-helper self, reformer activist, challenger, and humorous self. So the passionate self was really exploring a lot of emotionally charged situations. It was the most commonly displayed self in the poetry, and it mainly addressed romantic relationships, so topics like love, sexuality, heartbreak, violence, hatred. The survivor-helper self discussed more enduring difficulties, tragedies, pain, loss. The topics were more death, murder, rape, also social events, Hurricane Katrina, diabetes. Reformer activists took on multiple forms, so that of an educator, a crusader, an advocate, in connection to social reform and revolution. They often invoked their own personal life experiences, and the topics were things like war, child soldiers, HIV/AIDS, slavery, racism, police brutality. That's just to name a few. There are many, many more topics. The challenger self was pretty similar to the reformer activists, but they focused more specifically on challenging and protesting a particular norm, ideal, behavior, or condition, where the reformer activists just kind of cited a laundry list of societal ills and injustices. The challenger often came off more as the martyr, savior, hero. I've come to change things. I've come to save. Their topics tended to be around homelessness, stereotypes about black women, feminism, promiscuity, again, Hurricane Katrina, the murder of Chicago teen Darian Albert. The humorous self, they really address topics in a purposely joking, playful, witty, kind of facetious or amusing manner. And they often perform works in the formats of parodies, similes, haikus. They poke fun at stereotypes of poets through exaggerated imitation, sort of a beatnik, imitation. And their topics were around food, heartbreak, romance, sexuality, money, age. So that was the main findings with regards to the self.
So what population did you deal with? Can you speak to just the demographics and maybe the stratifications that may have existed as you set out to make your discoveries?
Sure. The main, as far as participant observations, those were mainly done in D.C. with the exception of one was done in New York City. And this was during 2009. And there were also some diary entries and in-depth interviews. I would say as far as, I'm trying to recall back with the interviews I would say were a bit more diverse in terms of race and age, whereas the participant observations I would say was majority African American community, events and open mics, but not completely. The age, oh gosh, that's hard to guess with the observations. I would say mainly 18 and older, and I know for sure my diary entries and in-depth interviews were 18 and older just because I didn't want to have to get clearance through human subject issue.
Okay. Now, one thing I'm interested in looking at, as it relates to poetry, one thing I'm interested in looking at, there's a dynamic that exists. It's kind of centered upon finding authenticity. A lot of times in the culture, there's a backlash to the stereotypes and other stigmas that may be found in the overall rap culture that exists within hip-hop. And in a lot of cases, spoken word, claims to be the authentic voice of the so-called lyricists. And I'm trying to understand, okay, with the 5 different selves that you found within your research, how does authenticity or that individual, I don't know, where does that notion come from, where we are an authentic voice, yet we still fall within these 5 categories?
Well, there were also themes that I looked at and found in the research, and the main themes were writing the self out of trouble, creating continuity and modification of self-identity through reflexive practice, and then the use of poetry to deliver messages and perceive family functions. And the authenticity claims really came up in that second one, the creation and continuity and modification of self-identity through reflective practice. And that's where, as artists write about themselves, they're kind of able to explore, reinforce, create, and reject identities and social constructs. But then these authenticity claims also come up where they explore who should speak about certain issues and experiences. So you have, from some, the idea where one should only speak from experience versus observation. So observation isn't sufficient grounds to address the topic. But it was interesting because in one of my interviews, I had a student say that with regards to gender, that men can speak of women's experiences, but then when it went to race, he felt that the observation of a Latino male regarding something that happened to an African-American male was sufficient as far as authenticity was concerned, that he could speak to something he had observed as far as within the African-American community. So it was interesting because, it seemed to somewhat contradict, they seem to contradict themselves to some degree, depending on what exactly was being talked about as to whether or not observation was enough.
Okay. I'm interested in another concept also. It's kind of the which came first, the chicken or the egg? Okay, now, take the 5 personas or the 5 identities that may exist. Now, how heavily are they influenced by the culture of the spoken word arena, or are these identities that come in, is this the type of person that will exist or will actually perform in a spoken word environment? Is this fostered in the home, or is it reaffirmed within the spoken word or open mic arena?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think it might be, to a degree that, there are particular people that are going to feel comfortable coming. I mean, one, you have to have an individual who's comfortable performing in a public arena.
Right.
Not everybody is going to be comfortable doing that. And I think the best way I can answer that is I would certainly say that once you do perform, the art form and the individuals tend to reinforce kind of the norms that are already there. So I think we're constantly observing things. So even without being directly told something, you're going to see which poets might get the most applause, or you're going to see that certain ways of performing or certain topics are, really reinforced through the audience's praise. So that may influence kind of which pieces an artist decides to do, what they decide to talk about, which self they decide to display. But yeah, I think initially there's probably, to some degree, some similarity between the types of people that are going to get out there and perform.
Okay. As far as, I don't know, how the outside community, because, being in Chicago, one thing I've learned, I went to undergrad in Alabama. I did some higher education in Louisiana. Now I'm back in Chicago. And, existing within the college spoken word arena in Chicago is one thing. But then you have another dynamic, the actual grassroots, the urban, kind of the impoverished community. But it's still a lower middle class black influence, like on the south side of Chicago. But there's still a class issue that exists where the poetry, is pretty much existing only within the poetry arena, and individuals who exist outside of the arena, they're still pretty much shut out, whether it's intentional or not. And I'm seeing a rift, and it's crazy because, from my perspective, spoken word has gone hand in hand with a lot of social movements, especially in the urban arena in the last 50 years, 60, 70 years. But just, I don't know, I'm starting to see a disconnect between the impoverished, those who maybe long for this revolution or this uplift that can be found in the spoken word poetry arena, just writing maybe in general, and the actual artist is a middle class, lower middle class, type of art form. So can you explain, how can we foster the links or continue to foster, maybe I'm just ignorant to the scenarios where it actually does exist, but how can we foster and kind of step beyond the stratification of class?
Well, two things kind of come to mind. One is absolutely the commercialization of it. If we're looking at things, such as Restless Women, Deaf Poetry Jam and stuff, right? You have to have HBO to see that, or you have to be able to purchase DVDs, right? And a lot of the venues, they're going to charge for you to get in. You're going to have transportation to get there, which, again, another cost. So I think those are some of the things that have led to, probably this particular group you're seeing as the ones that are visible in society. Yeah. However, in some of the literature reviews I've been doing and looking through, there's a lot of talks between educators of middle school and high school urban youth as using spoken word as a literacy tool because it's something that they see their students already doing and using outside of school. They have this love for kind of non-academic writing, so how can we utilize that love and bring it into the school and assist them with their academic writing? So obviously that speaks to the fact that these youth are, participating in it, and there are these enclaves and groups of students doing this, but I think perhaps they just are not as visible, and it may be more in a kind of neighborhood context because you may not have the means of securing a building and a large audience and these other things that contribute to your visibility. So I think that it would probably be a much harder group to kind of locate and document, but I think it exists just in a more fragmented capacity.
Okay, being that, with what you said, expanding, if these communities do exist outside of that mainstream realm, did your research, does it apply to those individuals? Perhaps could those identities exist beyond just the five, if that population exists, yet they exist on the fringes or outside of the mainstream middle class?
They could, but this research really can't be generalized because, I was only really looking in D.C. and one place in New York. I think that it certainly may, but without doing, larger research, and there's really not a way that I can, make that claim, especially not with applying one demographic to another.
Okay. So that is something that can be explored. If we can reach the populations. Okay, I'm going to take a note of that. Okay. Noted. Okay, now, it's interesting you spoke to the educational, possibilities of the art form, and you informed me that you're looking to take your research in that direction as you began to work on your dissertation. Can you just go into a little bit more detail about some of the driving inspiration behind that pursuit?
Yes, well, as you're probably aware, there's not a whole ton of academic research. There's one book that's been published by an English lit person, a professor, Susan Summersby Willett. You have like Tony Medina. I don't know if he's still at Howard, but I'm actually in the sociological realm. So pretty much everything I've been able to find from that kind of my standpoint and background has revolved around education and spoken word. So I was you're not the first person that's contacted me. Actually, I had another person that was also trying to do some, I don't remember if it was her MA or Ph.D. on spoken word in the D.C. area. So it seems like right now, this is our time when sort of the new MAs and PhDs are trying to explore this in a variety of capacities that may not just be in that English and literature standpoint. And with that, I going in that direction a bit because that's where the literature was, but I'm also still bringing it back to my idea about the selves. And so if you look back over time, right, the power to define is extremely important. So it's whose stories get told, who tells them, and how that defines groups of individuals. So oftentimes with sociology, there's been the argument that inequality is defined by kind of those at the top, the dominant group, rather than looking at the individuals being defined and seeing if that definition really works for them. Is that really what inequality is for them? Is it all race, class, or are there other definitions of inequality, and them being able to define and state what that inequality is and the stories and experiences? Well, we've seen throughout, especially in America, cultures that have, well-documented oral traditions, Native Americans, African Americans, and how there were laws imposed, right, to stop people from being able to read and write so that, the dominant group can be challenged, revolts wouldn't occur, hopefully. But then we've always seen the ingenuity with these oral traditions and, and on the Brazilian plantations with capoeira, hiding as a means of hiding the practice of self-defense and the practice of traditional song and dance. So spoken word has really been this continuation of oral tradition and a means for those voices that have usually been silenced to speak up and tell their own stories and define the self for themselves instead of having other definitions placed on them. So that's kind of the direction that I'm going, is still looking at how this has been a literacy tool, but also how it's a defining tool of the self and a way of kind of taking back power, right? And then in some sense it's become cultural capital because now the dominant group wants to buy in, right? They see profit, and I'm not just in profit. I mean, there are other excluded groups, regardless of, if it's dominant culture or non-dominant culture, where, groups of individuals such as people who identify as gay, lesbian, LGBTQ groups, other individuals that perhaps they were part of the dominant group but lower socioeconomic status, women. So, I mean, there are other groups that are taking it and kind of running with it as a way of speaking out again to define the self instead of having it imposed on them.
Okay, defining the self. Okay. With reference to back to the five identities, okay? If indeed we are trying to create a climate where we are inspiring individuals to define themselves, define who you are by your own innermost means, I guess that would be the closest to freedom we could possibly, come to. Is there room for change within those five identities? I understand you're not looking to generalize your research, but just, for future references, how can we, it may not even be necessary, but if change is necessary within those five arenas, is there room for growth? Is it a natural process of evolution? What factors would cause a shift in the five identities?
A shift? Wow. I mean, I really don't know. It could be a shift in culture. It could be a shift in what's going on, current events in society. I mean, I guess as far as this initial research, it was really to kind of create a typology. Right. And I guess if we're going if our goal is for social, reform or social change, then we're obviously going to have to go beyond just talking. So talking is good, educating is great, but if we're not taking those next steps, all of us getting together in a room and talking about it and praising one another and cheering isn't going to bring about the social change that many of the selves address. I think it's a good place to create kind of solidarity and groups, but unless we're going out there and voting, unless we're going out there and trying to change laws and reform laws and, get into as many different areas of society as we can into, whether it's a government job, an education job, unless we're taking these action steps to implement the ideas that are being put out, it's just a great social gathering.
A forum, a conference. So where do we go? In as far as research? You say this may be our time. Where do we go? Number one, I want to ask you that. What's next? And also, what type of reception, are you receiving from, the other standard? You say if this is our time, those individuals who existed in the time, before this, how are they receiving the research? Are people receptive?
Okay, so where would we go and how's the reception? I think what I mean by our time is what we may be able to accomplish is really solidifying this as an area of academic research. It's kind of in this, maybe a bit behind they're trying to establish a critical mixed race studies area of academia. So we may be able to start doing the same. The more of us that start doing research, if we start getting conferences together, maybe we can really solidify this in the academic arena as something that's not just viewed as kind of pop culture or a fad, but something where we can, connect the histories and the oral traditions and the importance of it. As far as within academia, I think people are excited. I was just at the Eastern Sociological Society conference in New York, and I actually received a grant to go. Their topic was storied lives and the telling of stories, so they were really excited about this kind of research. Within my own department, professors are excited about it. They find it, something that's intriguing and interesting. And as far as, like I've said, I've had other people contacting me that are interested in currently pursuing this type of research. So I think it's something that people are excited about, and they're interested to find the outcomes and see what comes out of it. I haven't spoke directly with someone like Tony Medina or Susan Summers, so I can't speak for them, but I would say certainly the young researchers and some of the more well-seasoned tenured professors, they're excited to see this type of research. It's something a little bit different, something a little bit new as far as within the academic arena. I think there are a lot of cultural phenomena that people explore, but looking at something like spoken word from different arenas, especially outside of English Lit, is intriguing to people.
Okay. I have one last question. As far as the influence as an artist, how much has that affected your academic endeavors, and vice versa? How much has that your academic endeavors affected you as an artist? Just that relationship between the two identities, the two selves that you have.
I write about I guess, to some degree it's a double-edged sword, right? Because we always have to be conscious of what influences us in our analysis, and being close to community helps in that you know people, right? They're willing to help you out. You kind of have an inside understanding and look. But at the same time, you have to be careful. One of the biggest issues I had was when you don't have to reveal yourself as a researcher because you're already a participant in the community and you're not doing something to where you would actually need them to sign off on it, you almost feel a little bit, that you're being a spy in some way.
An agent,
You're getting ready to air the dirty laundry. And I've heard things about, individuals that are, there are a few in particular that are extremely well known, that you hear some gossip behind the scenes, and things that floored me, and I was going, oh wow. And so at the end of the day, you have to think, do I include this or do I not include this? It's kind of that ethical dilemma where for academia you absolutely are supposed to include it, but on the other hand, you kind of feel this loyalty, and this, I don't want to get blacklisted from the whole entire community if they figure it out. Am I going to be hurting somebody by putting this out there? So that's the hardest kind of line to work with. And within academia, how it affects it, I think it absolutely can kind of affect sometimes where you go with your research, and then, like I said, how much of it you can actually reveal. So it influences it in that way. And then also time. I think it's really taken away from almost any time for me to be an artist. I've barely performed for most of my graduate school time. Probably a lot more disconnected than before I was in school, because it eats up so much of your time during doing research. So I think it's probably in some respects taken away from me actually performing and being an artist, and caused me to look at things more from an academic perspective. But as far as the artist part, I think that, absolutely affected what I decided to study, how I do research, how I interview people, choosing to use qualitative methods so that people always have a voice versus just quantitative data. So I think, coming from that artist perspective definitely influences how I research and what I view as important that a traditional academic researcher might just kind of pass up or not quite understand.
All right. Well, I appreciate you giving me a platform. I'm going to start walking on it, okay? And as I really, really start to really get my research off the ground, I'm going to consult you, okay? So don't think I'm a weirdo when I email you, okay?
No, that's absolutely fine. I think we all definitely should be in contact, everyone doing this type of research.
Perfect. All right. But we're down to the last 2 minutes. And again, I greatly, 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 greatly appreciate it. And I don't know, can you let me know, and anyone else who may hear this, how we can find more information on you, about you, and your work and your future work?
I do have a website, naliyahkaya.com. That's NALIYAHKAYA. Outside of that, you can, if you Google my name, you'll find a bunch of academic stuff that comes up at Poetic Personas. If you put that into your Google, you should be able to pull up my master's thesis, and there you can read all about the research we were talking about today.
All right. Once again, I thank you, and I will be in touch. And again, you're great. You're a great person. The fact that you gave me the time to actually speak to me is a testament to who you are as an individual, and the fact that you want to see the art form, and the research taken into a great place. So I appreciate your time and your energy. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for taking the time, and I kind of see that as something we should do. So, don't hesitate if you need anything, just shoot me an email.
All right. I wish you the best. All right.
You too.
All right, peace.